am Mrs Tang, and today we are going to be dissecting a flower. The aim is to identify all the organs of the flower involved with reproduction. We will inquire by using appropriate techniques during laboratory work, paying attention to health and safety, and by making observations throughout the dissection. So this is the equipment that I'll be using for the dissection. I have my scissors, probe for pointing at particular organs within the flower, and my forceps that I can use to pull apart certain organs. Now, with the flower, we can see that it has lovely bright red petals, and beneath the flower we can see the sepals. Now, not all flowers have sepals, but the purpose of the sepal is to protect the petals of the flower whilst it is growing. Pull apart the sepal. Oh, petals fallen. So you can see we've got 5 sepals and 5 petals. So the function of the sepal is to protect the petals. So this is when the flower is blooming. Petals in bloom. The petal is to attract pollinators towards the flower. Examples are the bee. So we can label the diagram. That is the petal, and beneath the petals we have the sepals. The next part that we are going to focus on looking at is the anther, which consists of the, which is held up by the filament. So this part is the anther, and beneath the anther we have the filament. The anther and the filament together is known as the stamen. So anther and filament beneath is going to be your stamen. So if we have a look at the flower underneath the magnifying glass, you should be able to see the pollen grains, and the pollen are within the anther, which is held up by the filament. see it closer. So you can see that the stigma is in the middle, and beneath, surrounding it, we have got our stamen, which consists of the anther and filament. That is our stamen with pollen on the end. At the very end. We have the stigma at the centre, and beneath is the style and the ovary. So here is the stigma in the middle, and beneath it, that is the style. And then at the very bottom, we have the ovary. These would have been the filaments holding up the anther, but the pollen has fallen off. So we're just going to get rid of that. So we have our stigma at the top, then the style, and the very bottom, there is the ovary. So the carpel consists of the stigma, which is sticky to catch the pollen, and the style, which is just beneath the stigma. This is where the pollen grain would travel down after pollination to then fertilise the ovule in the ovary. So the carpel consists of these three reproductive organs. So the purpose of the filament, which would be here, is to hold up the anther, so it's for support, and the anther contains the pollen grains. So when the pollen lands on the sticky stigma, that is called pollination. female organ where the pollen would land. And the style is to support the stigma and enable the pollen grain to travel down towards the ovary. Pollen travels down. The ovary contains the ovules. So when the pollen grain fuses with the ovule inside the ovary, that is what we call fertilisation. So moving on to the extension questions. Okay, so the stamen we've already mentioned consists of the anther and the filament. We have also mentioned that the carpel consists of the stigma, style and ovary. Structural differences between a wind-pollinated. So a wind-pollinated flower does not need petals. So first off, does not need petals, because they are not trying to attract pollinators such as bees. They typically have light, have very small and light pollen grains. This is in order for the wind to carry the pollen to the stigma on the plant or on a different plant. They will have low hanging stigma, or the stigma will be easily exposed in order to catch pollen. Easily exposed. They don't usually have sepals because they don't need the petals. Do not sepals. So another difference is with insect pollinated flowers, they can produce nectar to attract the bees. Main reason for them to have the differences is how they would be pollinated. So insects are relying on bees or animals to brush past the flower for the pollen to land on the stigma. Such as the bee. So insect pollinated flowers, they would have the nectar, which is sweet, so that the bees would be attracted towards the flower, or they would have bright colours, which would encourage them to go towards the flower, whereas your wind pollinated flowers would be relying on the wind to blow the pollen onto the stigma.